The information contained in this video is intended for educational purposes. We are not responsible for any damage to your device resulting from improper disassembly or installation. Proceed at your own risk.
Today I'm going to show you how to add a glowing apple to your iPhone 6. Cool thing about this mod is it uses the backlight controls to adjust how bright the apple gets. So if you're out at night and your screen doesn't need to be turned up very bright in order to see it, the same settings are going to apply to the apple itself unless you override it. And that's the other cool thing about this mod is that if you go into your settings and you switch off your auto brightness control, you can adjust not only how bright your screen is going to be, but also how bright the apple is going to be. So this is going to cut down on battery consumption because if you're in a low light area, you don't need to have this thing blaring, again, unless you want to turn it up and make it really bright. So let's do it.
If you're looking for parts, tools, or more information about this mod, check the video description. Once I publish the video, I really can't do much as far as annotations if you're using a mobile device, so I will add any new information to the video description itself. This is the piece that we're going to be adding to this iPhone 6. It's a luminescent glowing apple that goes on the back frame. You can see the circuitry is down here at the very bottom. It's interesting the way they designed this because it's got to be very slim in order to fit behind the battery, which is where it goes. So I'm going to do a real quick disassembly, just taking the screen out. If I'll be using the iScrews organizer here, just something I'm trying out. We call these training wheels, but if you haven't taken this phone apart before, it's not really a bad idea because it will help you keep your screws organized. And that is very important in the iPhone 6 because there are lots of screws that are going to be coming out, including the two down here on the bottom, which is what we'll start with. Now, if you need a full tutorial for screen removal, just follow the link in the corner to view our iPhone 6 screen replacement video. If you haven't checked out my channel yet, you can find all sorts of tutorials for iPhones and beyond, soon to include a full teardown and housing customization for the iPhone 6. But for today, what we're going to do is just go ahead and open up the screen. You will need to remove the screen, and we're going to have to take out the battery in order to get this cable to go underneath the top end of the phone. So go ahead and pry this open. And again, I will be kind of fast forwarding through a few of these sections because this is more about the mod and less about repairing or replacing screens. So of course, first thing we want to do is disconnect our battery. You'll have to take out these two screws right here and then remove that panel so that you can unplug your battery. So once you remove the panel, just very carefully pry under this cable right here and that'll disconnect. First thing we want to do is take off this panel up here at the top and get the display out of the way. We've got 5 screws that need to come out. These are different sized screws. They are not interchangeable. So again, make sure that you keep these things organized. You don't want to put them in the wrong spot. You can have some serious problems if you start mixing up your parts or your screws or anything else inside the phone. We'll have 4 cables here that we need to disconnect. These first 2, it doesn't really matter what order you go in. Just don't pull them out too far because we have a couple of other cables obscured that you can actually see now that will need to be disconnected as well. And then we will remove the display assembly from the housing. Now what we need to do is very carefully look at these 2 tabs at the bottom end of the battery. You'll see a couple black pieces of tape that kind of wrap around, and you want to get underneath those and as much underneath that white gooey stuff beneath them that you can, because we're going to grab a hold of those all at one time and just pull them towards the bottom of the phone. This is the easiest method that I've ever seen as far as removing the battery. You don't risk damaging the battery, and of course you can replace these later on afterwards if you want to order them. You don't have to use this same type of adhesive. It is the proper adhesive for the iPhone 6 battery. But in this case, I'm actually going to use some 3M tape because I don't want that cushiony effect that's underneath these, because these are a little bit thick. And I want the battery to sit right up against the back of the glowing light so that it stays put and sticks right into the back of the housing. So these things, you can just kind of pull them off to the side and they come out looking much longer than they actually are because they stretch quite a bit. Once you've got this completely removed, make sure that you have your battery unplugged, and then we can go ahead and remove it from the housing. On the inside, you'll see that we've got a couple of pieces of tape here on the sides of the Apple that we'll have to move, and this is where this is going to sit, and unfortunately, there's not really a spot for that cable to go through, so we're going to have to go underneath the logic board. So the first thing we want to do is remove these two little black pieces of tape. If you want to, you can take the whole board out if you want to be safer. If not, be very careful here. You don't want any of your tools that you're working with to slip, because it would be very easy to damage the internal parts of your phone. So just very carefully get underneath these little pieces of tape and peel them away. And then we get to the more difficult task, which is to remove the Apple. So I found the best way to get underneath this was with the corner of a small razor blade, like a precision box cutter. And once you lift it up a little bit, you can go under there with a flathead screwdriver and very gently pry your way around until you make it about 40% or so around the perimeter, and you'll be able to grab a hold of it from there and then pull it completely out of the housing. Now, I don't want to damage this because we might end up using it for who knows what later on, so I was more concerned about not denting the housing, and fortunately it doesn't look like that's going to be an issue as long as you just take your time and be very gentle with this. And the Apple kind of has a flexible piece of metal that surrounds it, so later on you can flatten it out if you need to. Watch out for that cable that the Apple logo tucks underneath. So you can see as I'm getting under there, there's a little bit of glue, but it's not too tough. And once you can get your fingers in there, you just kind of pull it out and very carefully slide it out from underneath this cable. I want to make sure you don't tear that on the way out. And there we have our Apple, which we'll set aside for who knows what later on. And I'd kind of clean this area up a little bit. If you wanted to, you could add some glue, but I'm not going to do that, and I don't really think that it's necessary. Something more like a sealant would probably be not a bad idea, maybe some silicone. But for the most part, I just wanted to see how this worked and how it fits in, so I didn't add anything at this point. This is from later on in the video. I did put a piece of Kapton tape down here at the bottom just to keep this thing from flopping around, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. So what we're going to do is make sure that we fit this into the housing so that the Apple comes through. And if you take a look on the other side of the phone, you'll see that you might have to slide it around a little bit, but just make sure that it matches up. And once we have that in place, I'd put some tape on here. Again, I'm using Kapton. You can use electrician's tape or something similar, but if you ever have to take this out, you want to make sure it's something that isn't going to be difficult to remove. Otherwise, you can easily tear the cables that you're taping down on top of. So the next thing we need to do is remove this little piece of tape that covers the backlight area. Now remember that these always have to be covered up. So if you remove this, you have to put another piece of tape on top of it. If you don't, it's possible to short out your backlight, and that's always a pain to deal with. So what we're going to do now is kind of match this up. You'll see that it's the two outer connections here that we need to be lined up with. There's really only one way that this thing will connect, so it's pretty obvious. And since the instructions weren't a whole lot of help, I was able to figure this out. But just make sure you have this lined up, and then we'll go ahead and tape it down. Of course, if we wanted a more permanent connection, we would want to solder this in place. But for a number of reasons, we're not going to do that. Mainly because if we want to, we can always come back and remove it. And also, this is a do-it-yourself kit, so you should not have to have a soldering iron in order to install the glowing apple. Now, I found the easiest thing to do was to take the thin tape that comes with the kit and place it onto the part that you're going to connect first of all. So just kind of put this tape here, and you might have to straighten that out a little bit, but leave it so that you can still see where the connections are underneath it, and that'll make it a lot easier for this to line up. So once you're sure that matches up properly, you go ahead and push the tape down. Now I want to mention that the light will not work as is because it has to have pressure behind it to make sure that these connections stay in place. So that's why they gave us these little foam pads that are going to go on top of the sticker you'll see here shortly. And I would go ahead and at this point cover up anything that you see that's metal with the tape. Make sure it's completely covered. We want to insulate that so that it doesn't ground out or short circuit anything. And next we'll go ahead and put this padding here. Now the padding by itself isn't going to do the trick. It's not until we actually close the phone up that we'll have a solid connection. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and plug everything back in here. If you want, you can install the battery first. It's not really a big deal. You can do it in either order. The first time I taped this down, I could feel a bump on top of it, and this should be nice and smooth. You don't want to smash the circuitry. So make sure, and you'll see that I had to kind of slide it over towards the left so that the cable has a little more slack than you would expect. And if you don't, you're going to smash that little component inside there when you close the phone up. And then of course, this will all be a waste of time. So make sure that when you set this down on the charging port area, that it's nice and smooth. You don't have any little bumps that you can feel in that cable. I'm going to use some red tape adhesive here to put the battery in. This stuff is very, very sticky. So again, it's not the original iPhone adhesive for the battery, but it does the trick. And if we ever have to, we can go back in and remove it. The first time around, I used some 3M adhesive and that worked fine also. But I took this apart a couple of times and I ended up running out of the 3M. So I'm using the red tape adhesive. Either one will do the trick. So we'll go ahead and put the battery inside the battery compartment. Plug it in, and then of course at this point you can put the 2 screws in the cover plate on the battery terminal. I just wanted to go ahead and test this, so close everything up. Remember, this is not going to light up until you actually close the phone, but when you do, hit the power button, you should see an Apple on the screen, and your Apple on the back should be lighting up as well. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button and feel free to share it on the social network platform of your choice. Check out some of my recent repair and product review videos and visit us on the web at gocellphonerepair.com. Thanks for watching.